Hello, Kwekwe, welcome, bonjour. My name is Michelle Chawla, and I'm the Director General of Strategy, Public Affairs, and Arts Engagement at the Canada Council for the Arts. On behalf of the Canada Council, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the Council's annual public meeting. Je salue tous ceux et celles qui sont.
I welcome all of those who are here today, as well as all of those who are listening to our web broadcast or who are following us on social media.
For the Arts acknowledges the land on which we gather is the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. The Council recognizes the Algonquins as the customary keepers and defenders of the Ottawa River watershed and its tributaries. We honor their long history of welcoming many nations to this beautiful territory and uphold and uplift the voice and values of our host nation. Further, the Council respects and affirms the inherent and treaty rights of Indigenous peoples across this land. The Council has and will continue to honor the commitments to self-determination and sovereignty we have made to Indigenous nations and peoples. The Council acknowledges the historical oppression of lands, cultures, and the original peoples in what we now know as Canada, and fervently believes the arts contribute to the healing and decolonizing journey we all share. This afternoon, I will provide an update on the Canada Council's activities this past year. We will also hear from both the chair of our board, Pierre Lassonde, and our director and CEO, Simon Brault, who will reflect on this past year and provide insight into the year ahead. The speeches will be followed by a question period. We will respond to questions from our live audience as well as those of you watching online. We also invited you to submit questions before today's meeting, and we'll also respond to some of the questions we receive in advance. All of the presentations will be in English and French, and speeches will be available in both languages on our website following the event. Merci à l'équipe de traduction.
Thank you to the simultaneous interpretation team, as well as to the sign language team in French and in English.
You can send your questions using the hashtag CanadaCouncil20. Ceux et celles qui sont en ligne pourront nous faire parvenir.
People online can tweet at Canada Council for the Arts 20.
Manquons de temps, donc le cas échéant, nous y répondrons par écrit. So, for those of you here in person, we will invite you to join us in the Winter Garden reception area on the ground floor of our building, where there will be a special guest performance from Sarah Harmer to mark the close of the exhibition in our Ajagemo art space. But more on that later. So we have a packed agenda, and we're excited to share it with you, so let's get started. J'aimerais vous présenter le président de notre conseil d'administration.
I would like to introduce to you Mr. Pierre Lassonde, who is the president of our board. He joined us in 2015. He's a philanthropist, an art collector, and he believes that art should benefit all Canadians.
Pierre Lassonde.
Voilà, merci Michel. Thank you.
Thank you, Michel.
I'd like to open by saying that I'm really incredibly proud of the work that the Canada Council has undertaken this past year. As many of you know, the board has an important contribution to make to the Council, and I can assure you that we take our responsibility very seriously. The board provides oversight of the Council's policy and investments. We also engage in discussions with the Council's management about priorities in an ever-shifting landscape. We do all this by paying close attention to the conversations taking place across Canada and around the world, and conversations about the arts, the audiences, and engagement. We also rely on the information the Council's teams gather about its granting activities, information about applicants and recipients, and the various outcomes of its programs and initiatives. Over the last 4 years, The board has strongly encouraged the council in the development of its capacity to measure the impact of its investments. Through measurement, the council is able to assess the progress of its commitment and make adjustments where needed so that those commitments are met by the end of the current strategic plan. The council is currently working from its 2016 strategic plan. And if you remember, in that same year, the government announced that it would incrementally increase the council's budget over a 5-year period. With this, the council articulated several important goals to bolster its support and deepen Canadian experiences of the arts by 2021, at which point the current strategic plan will come to an end, and the council's budget will have doubled to $360 million. Cette année, le Conseil a pris.
This past year, the Council made key decisions to keep it on the right track to meet its commitments. And it can show these advances through the new strategic oversight tools, such as the commitment to make sure that 25% of the new funds the Council receives with doubling of its budget reach new recipients, a commitment we're on track to deliver by 2021. We believe this commitment will be hugely impactful for Canadian society as we reach the next generation of creators, a generation that is increasingly diverse and digitally skilled. This commitment is about the renewal of our arts sector, a renewal that will ensure the arts remain an integral and vital part of life in Canada. I'd also like to note that the Council has made great strides in recent years towards its capacity for both quantitative and qualitative measurement. And during my mandate as chair, it's been a great pleasure to witness the Council become a world leader in the field of measuring the impact of public investments in the arts. The Canada Council is committed to the principle of transparency. One of the ways the Council shares knowledge with the public is an online tool called Stats and Stories. This tool provides key information on its support in each fiscal year. This past fall, the Council launched the 2018-2019 edition of Stats and Stories. With this tool, some of the things you can discover include data on the Council's various programs, areas of investment, regional reach, and 5-year trends. Stories about grant recipients, what they did with the Council's support, and the presence of their work across Canada and around the world, as well as downloadable data tables that allow you to find the information that's of greatest interest to you. As the Council deepens its capacity to turn knowledge into action, it strengthens its capacity to support the arts across Canada. Last year, the Council supported artists in 733 communities across Canada. And the Council's presence extends beyond Canada as more and more artists are reaching international audiences with the Council's support. But I'll leave it to you to learn more about this support across Canada and around the world by exploring our website.
The Council has made important progress in recent years, drawing on its knowledge to make informed decisions so that we're on track to deliver on all of our commitments. I'd like to congratulate Simon Pro for his leadership this past year and for fostering a culture of evidence-based decision-making at the Council. and I am certain that his second term as director and CEO will be as successful and inspiring as his first. I'm impressed by the strength and commitment of our executive team and by what they've achieved, and I thank them on behalf of the board. As we move ever closer to 2021, I'm confident that we'll achieve the ambitious plan we set for the Council a little over 4 years ago. And I look forward to working with my colleagues and management to imagine an ever more impactful arts sector in Canada and to find ways to make our shared vision a lasting reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre. So as our chair just pointed out, the Canada Council's current strategic plan will come to an end in 2021. In that plan, the Council made 4 commitments, which focus on art support, digital technology, Indigenous creation, and the international presence of the arts. The plan also reaffirms our long-standing commitment to equity, as well as to the next generation of artists and audiences. We publish key information on our progress online, but I'd like to take the opportunity to highlight some of the activities we've undertook this past year. An important part of our work to increase our support to the arts was a focus on reaching young and emerging artists. We undertook several activities and initiatives to make sure we met this goal. For example, last March, we launched the new and early career artist profile to make it easier for artists to apply for their first grant. And this past summer, we piloted another initiative to make the granting process easier for first-timers with the launch of CoLab, a multi-day outreach event with sessions designed to help artists, groups, and organizations apply for their first grant. These sessions were held in Toronto and across the Greater Toronto area with partners from the City of Toronto, the Toronto Arts Council, and the Ontario Arts Council. More than 350 artists participated in grant application writing workshops, demonstrations of the Council's online application portal, roundtable discussions with artists from the community who shared their experiences, open forum breakout sessions, and individual meetings with our officers. This past year, the Council also continued to deliver outreach sessions to artists and arts workers at all stages of their careers, as well as to organizations. These sessions took place across Canada in cities, regional centers, and remote communities. Some of the places we went included Dawson City, Vancouver, Moncton, Hamilton, Fort McMurray, Whitehorse, Calgary, Kelowna, Red Deer, and North Bay, to name just a selection of locations. We'll continue our outreach work in the coming year to make sure we reach a wide range of artists and organizations, and in particular, new applicants. Un exercice similaire nous a...
Outreach was also an important part of our commitment to amplify the quality, scale, and sharing of artistic and literary creation through digital technology. This past year, our Digital Strategy Fund program officers were also on the road. They visited 13 communities across Canada to further engagement with the fund and to create networking opportunities for those working at the intersection of the arts and the cultural industries. We also know that we reached a large number of people with our online sessions for the fund. And we're pleased that the Digital Strategy Fund has had a wide reach across Canada, including the north and rural communities. We're starting to hear about the impact of the nearly 200 projects funded so far. For instance, we've heard how the fund has raised awareness about the digital changes and specific challenges for the arts sector. We've heard how the fund has launched important conversations related to ethics, discoverability, data, privacy, and digital rights management. And we've heard about how the fund has helped Canadian artists and arts organizations build bridges with the international partners and access new networks. As part of our digital commitment, this past year, we also announced the Creation Accelerator. The Accelerator is an exciting pilot initiative in partnership with CBC Radio-Canada. We invited Canadian artists to submit a concept for a digital creation project with the potential for distribution on one of CBC Radio-Canada platforms, our partner in the Creation Accelerator. We were blown away by the interest in this initiative, with over 530 applications submitted for consideration. And we can't wait to see what inspiring digital creations emerge from this partnership, be they sound art, podcasts, web series, digital graphic novels, animation, and more.
Tripling our support to Indigenous creation, and at this time we are well on track to reach this goal by 2021. As of 2018-19, we've delivered $17.8 million towards our target of $18.9 million. A large part of this commitment has been delivered through our Indigenous grant program, Creating, Knowing, and Sharing the Arts and Cultures of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We continue to strive for the presence of Indigenous perspectives in all of our work. With our work to raise the international profile of artists and arts organizations, for example, we made sure the work we shared with global audiences included that of Indigenous artists. One of the most exciting moments for Canada on the world stage this past year was the 2019 Festival International Cervantino in Guanajuato, Mexico, where Canada was the guest country. Cervantino audiences discovered Canada's vibrant, culturally diverse art scene in a way that international audiences had never before experienced, with 17 inspiring music, dance, and theater shows, including A Tribe Called Red featuring Lido Pimienta for the festival's opening event, Alisapi Isaac, To Be Theater, Ill Abilities Crew, Sean Jobin, Buddies in Bad Times Theater, and the Royal Winnipeg Ballet. The Council was proud to support Canada's participation in Cervantino in collaboration with our partners from Global Affairs Canada, the Embassy of Canada in Mexico, and the Department of Canadian Heritage. The Canada House program, presented by the Embassy of Canada in Mexico, presented audiences with 3 weeks of visual, literary, and performing arts to deepen their experience of arts and culture from Canada. And Telefilm Canada presented 9 original films exploring Indigenous and youth-related themes. En 2020, nous continuons.
In 2020, we will continue to champion and support arts from the Canada on the global stage, notably throughout Germany, and in the Frankfurt Fair. In 2020, Canada will also be invited to the Ivory Coast with the Abidjan Market for Performing Arts. Both of these opportunities exemplify the growing international interest in Canada's arts and cultural scene. As I noted earlier, in the current strategic plan, we said that we would also deepen our long-standing commitment to equity. And we recently launched Expanding the Arts 2 strategy. This strategy supports the expression and engagement of artists who are deaf or who have disabilities and of the arts organizations across Canada that work with them. Expanding the Arts 2 builds on our preceding strategy from 2012. You can read about the strategy online or watch a video about the strategy with interpretation in American Sign Language and Quebec Sign Language.
Strategic plan commitments, which was developed with input from our stakeholders. With our current strategic plan coming to an end and preparations for our next strategic plan on the way, we want to hear from you. So before the Canada Council's Director and CEO, Simon Brault, speaks about how we'll be developing the Council's strategic vision beyond 2021, let's take a look at a video featuring some of the musical performances from Canada's presence at Cervantino.
But I wasn't born to follow her. You Ojibwe Nation. Our DNA is of earth and sky. Our DNA is of past and future.
Wow, quelle performance.
What wonderful performances. I had the chance to attend many of those shows at Guadamato. I had an opportunity to meet the artists behind the scenes, after the shows. Not only the artists were wonderful, but the communion and the audience that was huge at the Servantino Festival. It was deeply moving, in fact. That being said, I would like to thank all of you for being here and for participating online as well. Michelle gave you an overview of our recent progress. I would like to present the work we are undertaking to develop our next strategic plan, which will begin in 2021. In 2021, our budget will reach, or our parliamentary allocation will reach, $360 million, double what it was in 2015. Our indicators tell us today that by 2021, we will have met all of our strategic plan commitments and delivered the related investments. Does that mean we will simply move into a new status quo? The answer is no, of course. And it will always be no. Because an organization such as the Canada Council must always consider the relevance and impact of its actions and adapt to the changes in its environment, which is full of changes. However, planning does not mean to predict everything, especially when it comes to artistic creation. Art expresses, illustrates, criticizes, interrogates, transposes, and sometimes even transcends the realities, issues, and hopes of society by offering unexpected perspectives. When you direct and lead an arts council, you hope that you will constantly be surprised, and I'm not disappointed. Art is an essential condition for democracy to be sustained and to reinvent itself. Art is a source of re-enchantment in a world where, unfortunately, fear, threats, and disillusionment are taking up more and more space. With our next strategic plan, we will reaffirm the relevance of public funding for the arts in Canada, both in the current context and the one we foresee for the next 5 years. We look forward to base ourselves on the strong measurements and supporting rationale. We want to strengthen our recent achievements and build on promising commitments for the future. We will soon launch an engagement exercise with as many stakeholders as possible, both within and outside of the Council, online and in person. Once again, we want a unifying, inspiring, and innovative plan. A plan that will allow the arts to contribute even more to a humane, just, and sustainable society. A plan that gives everyone access to the arts and their power to inspire and emancipate. A plan that allows us to collaborate with various partners in all sectors in order to maximize the presence and reach of the arts in our lives, in our communities, and at the heart of our international activities. Of course, the planning process that we are launching will not put us back to zero. We have made real and tangible advances over the last 4 years, and it is our responsibility to honor our most transformative commitments over time so that they can produce optimal results. In this light, we have already decided to continue to support the journey towards truth and reconciliation with Indigenous communities through artistic creation. This means we must accelerate our reflection on the decolonization of our approaches and systems and take swift action. Continue on the path of inclusion by being even more open to new practices and by drawing in communities that have been kept at a distance from the Council for too long. We will also continue to work towards inclusion and equity and consolidate and expand our understanding of this commitment, especially to people in the deaf and disability arts, culturally diverse and official language minority communities. We will also look at issues of gender and sexual identity, as well as career stages. Continue to consider the creation and sharing of art as it is questioned and defined by digital technologies. The strategic fund we created 4 years ago, as Michel Chalana mentioned, reached many artists and organizations across Canada and met various needs. It has led to hundreds of innovative partnerships and established the basis for new approaches that will need to be further tested, consolidated, and amplified. The fund, the digital fund, must be even more open to experimentation with digital tools and to work models for artistic creation and dissemination, distribution, and engagement with large audiences. The Director General, Carolyn Warren, Director General of the Arts Granting Programs Division, is already planning in-depth conversations with the community about the future of our investments in the digital shift and on the development of new models of cooperation and joint investment with the private sector and leading cultural industry organizations. We spoke about Radio-Canada, for instance, before, and CBC. Further support the reach of Canada's artistic and literary presence on the international stage and contribute to the redefinition of Canada's cultural diplomacy. As mentioned by Michel, the coming year will be marked by the strong presence of artists from Canada in both Germany and Abidjan on the Ivory Coast. Another initiative I'm particularly excited about after my trip to the north, my second big trip to the north, we will soon begin preparations for the Arctic Arts Summit. And of course, on the international front, we'll have many opportunities to test other intervention models through our regular programs, special investments by the Government of Canada for certain initiatives, and a coordinated approach to cultural diplomacy. We are not merely finishing one strategic plan to begin another. We are committed to the long term, taking into account the challenges and opportunities that emerge out of the context in which artists work. And we've said it many times, when the Council develops policies, programs, or initiatives, we try to take into account the various realities that exist across Canada. Of course, it is only once we step outside our offices and engage with the public and our partners that we get a true sense of the challenges and possibilities on the ground. My trip to the Northern Territories in August 29 allowed me to imagine new ways to engage in a dialogue about strategic planning. During the trip, I met artists, cultural workers, members of the public, representatives from the community associations, and elected officials, and civil servants as well in the territorial governments, all from many different backgrounds: First Nations, Inuit, Métis, New Canadians, non-Indigenous people, members of diverse cultural communities and linguistic minorities, both young and old. I noticed, once again, how great the cultural, economic, linguistic, geographic, and political differences are between the Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, and even between communities within the same territory. The North is not a homogeneous entity. Realities, issues, and needs differ greatly from one community to the next, and local partnerships will be a necessary part of our response. We must not confine our understanding to geographical borders. Rather, we must be open and sensitive to complexity and to embrace it and take it into account in our projects and our accomplishments.
example here, but of course, Canada has many communities of artists. I, as well as my colleagues who traveled the country, also had the opportunity to engage in discussions with many artists and cultural workers in Toronto and Vancouver this past year. And I will be undertaking a similar exercise soon in various parts of Atlantic Canada. The Council's knowledge, combined with that of our partners in the fields and the crucial Canada-wide engagement exercise we are undertaking for our next strategic plan, will help us to create an inclusive and looking forward approach. In short, we would like to reflect on the ways in which we can adapt our work for greater efficacy. We cannot do this work alone, behind closed doors. We are ready to listen and to create a strategic plan that takes into account the present realities of this vast territory that is Canada. Today, we are launching the process to develop our next strategic plan. And I'll invite you to follow us on social media and to visit our website where we will post more information in the coming weeks. The Council is committed to listening to voices that have been underrepresented in discussions on the funding and sharing of the arts in Canada. Any attempt to project ourselves in the future, propelled by the voice we have already heard, would be both dangerous and against the democratic nature of this exercise. We need to hear from all groups seeking equity and recognition, and in particular, Indigenous peoples and youth. Since the Occupy movement, young people around the world and in Canada have been making their voices heard and sharing their views on issues through the strong social movements. We are also keeping an ear to the ground for constructive criticism of the Council. We will carefully consider any suggestions to improve the performance and impact of our initiatives and programs, as well as the whole of our operations. We are committed to maximizing the relevance and the impact of the arts in society and to securing the presence of the arts at the major decision-making tables where the future, our future, is discussed. Our plan must not only take into account issues that matter to Canadian citizens, but also set tangible goals for addressing them. The arts are a symbolic force that enables us to tackle current challenges, and we will make sure that we support the social role they can play in our diverse communities. We are only at the beginning of our process for exploring the themes and to address it in our strategic plan, and we want to hear from you about the issues where the arts can make a difference. The issues are sometimes complex. Actually, I would say most of the time, more and more. They are moral, political, ethical, and cultural approaches to how we can respond. Take, for example, the issue of climate change. It touches on environmental, technical, and physical considerations, but it goes beyond these. Climate change raises questions about social inequality and the fundamental and collective rights, and ultimately a question of climate justice. Evidently, the people and communities who are the least to blame for global warming are suffering the worst consequences. This is why the Council will consider an authentic Indigenous perspective as well as an international and inclusive point of view when it thinks about a potential response to climate change. And there are many possible responses. At stake is the very real ability of the arts and culture to transform rampant fear, isolation, and anxiety in the face of climate irregularities into individual and collective hope. Also at stake are the creativity and the united efforts of the cultural sector's leadership who are thinking about how their sector can evolve, survive, and thrive. For example, large international festivals and local ones as well are now adopting charters and concrete measures to reduce their carbon footprint in response to growing demand from festival goers and artists who make them a requirement for their participation. I said at the outset that I expect a lot of questions about our next strat plan. Of course, we don't have all the answers because we've not yet begun the discussions with our various stakeholders. But I can undoubtedly speak to the process we are considering, the major milestones we are setting for ourselves, and the general vision guiding the exercise. Lastly, I would like to thank all of those who contribute to and enhance this great discussion on the arts and our shared future. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to invite Caroline Warren. Caroline is the Director General of the Arts Granting Programs Division, the core of our work. Caroline will join me for the question period.
So, in recent months, we've been following several social trends that are relevant to the Canada Council, and we've received several related questions. So to start the question period, we'd like to start by responding to those areas. So the first question that we received is, what will happen to the Digital Strategy Fund after 2021? Opportunities to receive funding for this kind of activity are really important. What comes next?
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, all of you, for joining us today. That's a great question. And as Simon and you, Michelle, have mentioned in your speeches today, that the Digital Fund, although it was originally intended to be a 4-year strategic fund, is not going to disappear at the end of 2021. What we are now seeing is the real sort of impact of many of the projects we've funded, which are in midstream, because the fund is still young. So we are, we're in a period where we're really evaluating what those impacts are and what we can actually do to scale up and leverage the work that's been done to date in the future. Is there anything that you would like to add in addition, Simon?
No, I think it's clear.
Well, then maybe you'll take the next question. So how does the Canada Council ensure artists in regions across the country have access to and are successful in obtaining funding?
I must say, that's a question we're debating, I would say even daily at Council right now, because we try to make sure that the fund distributed by the Council are impacting every part of the country, and that there is fairness in the way we fund the arts across the country. Canada Council is not working with regional envelopes. What we do basically is we're responding to demand. So it's really kind of a bottom-up operation. Artists are developing their work, creating organization, and want to share their work and apply at their municipal level, at the provincial level, and eventually at the Canada Council. And we're responding to that. What we try to do, what we are really concerned with now, is to make sure that an artist, no matter where the artist is in Canada, applying to the Canada Council, have a fair chance to get supported, and that in fact this kind of access is comparable from a region to another. We know that we are working in a system a system that is very uneven, very unstable, because one day we have more money and there's less money at the municipal level or the provincial level. So it's kind of as a federal funder, clearly we are one of the many players, but what we try to do is to be true to the values of the Council, respond to what is proposed to the Council, Council and do it in a way that is fair and equitable. But it's a constant challenge because the differences of context for production in rural environments in the north and indigenous communities in major cities, I mean, these are very, very different contexts. And for us, what we really want to do more and more is to work with local partners in order to understand what are the trends, how to deliver and sometimes co-deliver the support we can offer. So the good news is that Canada Council now knows more than ever where the money is spent, how it is used, and what is the impact, because we're measuring that and we're tracking it in a way, and we have kind of almost daily numbers about where we are, while before we needed to we needed to wait at the end of the year and then, you know, see in retrospect what happened as opposed to react quickly.
Merci. So before I turn it to the room, I will turn over to my colleague Eliane to ask questions that we receive on social media.
Merci, Michel. Donc, on a reçu une question en français.
Thank you, Michelle. We got a French language question from Barbara Priso Stevenson, who asked, what are you looking to encourage the presence and participation of Canadian artists on the international scene, in particular in the southern countries? What is the strategy?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for that question. Well, we have more than one strategy. We have about 2 or 3. Firstly, I must mention that last year we spent $26.5 million in our tours and international activities through the arts funding programs. We supported 1,700 activities in more than 100 countries throughout the world, so that was a great start. The funding programs are a very important aspect for the artists, and we respond to their requests. When we get applications, it's to go somewhere where artists wish to work, so we follow artists with our funding programs. A second aspect, a different one, is support that we give to artists with international platforms, such as the Cervantino Festival, which we mentioned earlier. We also have the Edinburgh and Venice platforms, among others, internationally. So it takes another vehicle other than the funding programs. The third aspect, and I think you heard Simon Bourreau talk about it, was cultural diplomacy, which, of course, is linked to the first 2 pillars that we are following. So we have strategies that are numerous, and regarding the South, I would like to say that we have delegations this year in Africa, in Tokyo, in South Korea, as well as the funding programs. We do have delegations that are very specific, that are giving support to those platforms. I would just like to add something to that, something that was struck us when we created our new strategic plan. We had several goals. One of the goals was to develop investments, international investments. So you must remember that in our previous plan, we had already doubled our amounts. We went from 5 to 20 million. And that doubling had been considered for a period of 2 years. And in less than 1 year of announcing the strategic plan, we had a whole lot more requests, and we were able to go even further. So these are areas that have a lot of interest. And what we're seeing today is that many, many artists, especially or even when they're young, you know, it's not the same way of thinking as years ago. A young artist develops their work, and when they're mature, they say, let me go international. No, now what we're seeing is that young artists are creating. And as soon as they start thinking of getting their work out there, they're thinking of local, national, and international audiences. So there is a true change in the way art is being created and distributed, and especially using digital means. So it's not a program that's going to have a reduced interest. We're seeing, on the contrary, that there's going to be more and more. We need to look how we can work with our partners, with other arts councils throughout the world to share resources, to share ideas, develop programs, common programs, to try to support the presence of artists throughout the world more efficiently. Thank you.
Take questions from those of you in the room. If you're here, and also on social media, we're going to continue that. So if you're here in person, if I could invite you to come and stand here, pose your question at the microphone so we can capture your question for the web audience. One reminder to please not speak or ask about specific files or grant applications due to confidentiality reasons. So we'd appreciate if you kept your questions a little bit broader in that context. So while we wait for people, are you ready? Oh, please. Okay. On to you.
Thank you all. One sector that may I've missed, is not mentioned, is the volunteer sector, and that permeates every arts organization across this country. And one concern as a volunteer, if I'm looking at an organization, I would like to see the anti-harassment policies and procedures of that organization on a website, in ordering as a determining factor whether my level of participation in that organization. May I suggest, from the Canada Council point of view, when you're approving grants from organizations, you would take that in consideration, that they publish their anti-harassment policies and procedures online, so that whether as a volunteer, potential employee, a donor, that I can, part of that is my consideration of that level of participation in that organization. That's a direction I suggest you can look into, my friends.
I will say that we do ask this of the organizations that we fund. We require them to have an anti-harassment policy, and it pertains to anybody who's working for that organization.
Online? On their website?
You're asking
When they have a website.
Yeah, when they have a website.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Then we'll go to our next social media question. Eliane.
Thank you, Michelle. So another question we received online is this. The Canada Council was established to serve all Canadians. Ontario is home to 39% of Canadians and 43% of Canada's artists. Ontario also produces 48% of Canada's cultural GDP. Yet, Ontario only receives 33% of all Canada Council grants. How can you continue to justify underfunding Canada's most populous province at a time when the Canada Council's funding has been doubled? In the face of an affordability crisis in places like Toronto and the GTA, how do you intend to redress this injustice?
So thank you for the question. We don't intend to justify anything. As I explained already, the way the Canada Council is attributing its funding is really driven by the demand we get. If you compare right now an organization in Toronto funded by the Canada Council to any other similar organization in Canada, you will realize most of the time that the level of funding is higher in Ontario. It's true for almost all the institutions in Ontario, for instance. Where the difference happens is the level of demand for projects or small and medium-sized organizations. So Canada Council is not, in fact, our role is not to redistribute wealth in Canada. Our role is really to see, what's out there, what are the grants application, and to make sure that the level of success and the success rate, we call, the number of people, the percentage of people who get supported by the Canada Council will apply, is consistent from a region to another one. So we feel that certainly there is room for growth in Ontario. And in fact, you probably heard when Michel Chala made the presentation that we did a lot of outreach over the last year, a lot of the outreach in Ontario, not only downtown Toronto, but all across Toronto, to make sure that people hear about the Canada Council, that they apply. We talked about the CoLab project, which is to help people to develop their applications and all of that. But I think it's really important to realize that when we talk about, housing and all these issues, yes, they are real in Toronto, but let me tell you, if you go to Iqaluit, it's much worse than Toronto. So the role of the Canada Council is not to kind of correct all those things that are uneven and that or to justify them. Far from it. Our role is really to make sure that when artists have projects, when they apply to the Canada Council, no matter where they are, that we support them. So we think that, especially with the diversity of the artistic population in Ontario and that, we hope that we will have more and more applications and more growth. And our funds will be distributed according to the growth. There's no reason why we would decide that a symphony in Ontario needs to get more money because the population of Ontario is bigger. Per capita funding is not the approach for funding the arts. It was never the approach, and it won't be the approach, because it would hurt a lot of communities in Canada, especially the smaller one, and the North and Indigenous and all that. We won't take that road. But there is room for growth. We agree, and we hope that there will be growth in Ontario.
Merci.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question about addressing climate change. So we can't really address climate change without talking about corporatism. The 90% of the carbon emission produced by top 1% of the population. I'm wondering if in addressing how artists react to the drastic change in climate and all of its related topics, what is the Canada Council's thoughts on
Yeah, so what we realize now is that the question of climate change is a question that is clearly debated and raised by many artists across Canada. We see it in their speeches. We see it in their work. Downstairs, we have the good example of the exhibition showing work about a lot of the challenges that we are facing because climate change. We know that this is, we heard it, with this new government in Canada, that climate change is very high on the agenda. So, but the role of the Canada Council is to make sure that first we look at our own carbon footprint. How do we deal with that in this building? How do we conduct all of our operations? And we are doing this work now, and we will eventually communicate around it. Our role is also mainly, obviously, as an arts funder, to fund the artistic creation that is dealing with anything but also climate change. And I'm telling you, we see more and more of this work created and supported by the Council and presented all over the world. And finally, we also have a role in terms of the relationship we have as a public funder with many organizations and institutions who get core funding from the Canada Council, because they are also asking questions about their own situation. So it's really kind of a question that won't be solved in one declaration and all of that, but it's something that we will explore, and we are launching really consultations and engagement with the community right now about all the different topics we want to discuss in the next strategic plan. Climate change and environment is one of them. So we are really launching that conversation, and the results of this engagement will be presented and discussed with the board of the Canada Council, and will come eventually with position and positioning and concrete ways of advancing that agenda. It won't go away, we know that. It's quite obvious. And it's not only the artists, but also the audiences are asking all the time questions about how we deal. People are asking the art sector to be exemplary on that front. And I think it's one of the direction that is kind of really surfacing in many of the conversations we are having with the community now. Thank you for the question.
Good evening. My name is Mala Thapar. I'm a theater artist, poet, writer. And my main concern is in applying art to relieve pain in the invisible sections of society. So it's an interact which basically is devoted to helping people who have disabilities, helping people who are incarcerated again, and those who are seniors who are losing their memory, and all those issues. So I would request, while I truly appreciate all that you're doing in great degree, it's phenomenal. Nobody else is doing it in the world that way. But there is one cadre which I think needs attention. Art for its art's own sake is one thing, but art for application and relieving stress in society, including the social climate, which we are always forgetting. Because when I teach high school students and I teach university, I find that the social climate has undergone a tremendous change in the last 2 decades. And it's not how much we can put in funds and exhibit it for their own glory, but it's for relieving pain of those who will never surface, and they never do because they don't have a voice. And how will they have a voice? Because they don't have the means to have a voice. So I came today from Barrie, Ontario. I drove up and there was an accident and all on this highway, but I said, no, I must go and make at least my presence felt. And this is what I strongly feel in interacting with communities, not only in Ontario, Canada, but also in India, where I go and do these theater workshops, and Asia and the United States. I find this a universal phenomena. So this is where Canada can really step in. Thank you.
Yes, I think we agree with you. And I do want to tell you that we are having those conversations. One of the things that we're looking at with the model, we have a new model, but as Simon said earlier, nothing is status quo. So we are looking at how we've built it, what we mean by the profiles we've created, where are the gaps in what we're currently funding. And we really want to take into consideration what we've heard, and you're not the very first person to bring this to us, a perception that there are certain kinds of art forms involved in engagement of different kinds with the public that are having a difficult time accessing council funding now. And that is very much on the radar, and it's part of a discussion we are undergoing at the moment in my division with people in this room. And so I hope that a year from now we'll have a different conversation.
Thank you very much.
So we have time for your last question.
Thank you. Congratulations on your participation on the Festival Cervantino. I know it was a great success. And my question is if your international strategy includes bringing international artists to Canada in order to co-produce with Canadians here. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. The answer is yes. Obviously, we call that reciprocity. We completely understand that international exchanges cannot be one way, us being on the world stage without inviting. I think it needs to be an exchange. Canada Council is not alone in that domain because I see my colleagues from Canadian Heritage who are funding festivals and all of that and venues and presenters who have people from artists from all over the world. I think that we cannot imagine to grow the international presence of Canadian arts and literature without growing the reciprocity part of it. It needs to be a fair deal with the rest of the world. So we don't fund the artists from abroad. We fund the presenters or the festivals or the people inviting the artists or collaborating or co-creating or co-curating work. So it's again, it's another portion of what we do where there is growth. And just to go back to the question before, I think it's really interesting to see now that the difference for the Canada Council from where we are now and where we were 5 years ago is that 5 years ago, at the beginning of any given year, most of our funds were kind of frozen, or they were already kind of attributed to organizations for their ongoing operations. Now we start every year with a big portion, almost 50% of our funds that are uncommitted. So it means that there's a lot of room for new experiences, projects, and all of that, and for an evolution of the work and of our understanding of both the nature of artistic creation and the impact it has and the context in which it can happen. So, yes, thank you for the question.
Merci. Donc, on a le temps pour une ou deux.
Thank Thank you. So we have time for one or two more questions.
So if there's anyone else in the room that would like to have a question, please come here. And while we wait, Eliane has another social media question.
Thank you, Michelle. So we have received a question online about funding decisions, and the question reads as follows. How are funding decisions being made, and what is the jury's role in the allocation process?
I will start by saying that we have an incredibly detailed description of how allocation decisions are made on our website. But the jury, peer assessment is still at the absolute core of our decision-making at Canada Council. And the peer assessors in any given committee rank and score applications. And at that point, they literally sign off on the ranking, and it remains the absolute gold standard for all decisions that follow in terms of the allocation of the actual grant amount. And there are many considerations that have to be made. You know, what is the amount asked? What is the available budget? I mean, how much can we actually fund? What is the history of funding for this organization in the case of operating funds? At that point, the officer is the one who looks at these multiple considerations and makes recommendations to a director, and the director is the one who makes a final call on the allocation amount, always respecting that primary ranking and scoring by the peer assessors. So that is the system, and we feel very strongly that it is the heart and soul of Council's decision making, and we know that there are other arts councils in the world who have stopped doing this because it's expensive and a lot of work to do, but it is a primary principle of the way we think and we work.
Thank you, Carolyn. Over to you.
Bonjour.
Good afternoon. I'm sure we can all agree that the attraction of Canadian arts is to the Canadians, the artists, and to what they produce. Also, you are working in the Salzburg area. Are you looking to doing more in that realm? Maybe work with universities to make Canada a prime destination throughout the world to work in culture, to train curators and promoters? Well, the answer is yes, in the sense that we recognize that in Canada we're talking a lot about continued growth and shortage of workers, continued growth of this shortage. But one thing that's really clear is that there is shortages in these types of jobs, this type of work. Administration, we need production workers, but there is a growing lack of manpower. So the sustainability of the sector is in flux, actually, if I can say it like that. Being the president of the World Federation of Arts, I'm hear it everywhere. People are saying that their investments in their sectors are at risk because there are problems with the next generation or training of specialists. There are markets that are in full development where they can't afford to pay people anymore or find the people to do the work. It's a big issue. What we want to do is cooperate with universities, but also cooperate, like in Strasbourg or throughout the world, on leadership programs on the ground, because we do recognize that there is basic training that is required, but there is also a hands-on training that of sorts that has to be done, because recruitment problems are increasing, and it's starting to be seen in artistic directors. We've seen it in Toronto recently, actually. We saw that, yes, it's a world market, an international market, but people trained in Canada are less competitive, and there are fewer of them to get these very competitive jobs. So it's an issue that we constantly talk about We're looking at how to deal with this. We're not a training institution, but we're looking for partnerships, and we're open to all types of ideas to help us consider the growth of leadership and artistic skills.
Bon, ben merci à vous deux.
Well, thank you to all of you. I hope you agree with that. Well, thank you. And thank you to all our presenters.
Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Just a little reminder, all of our speeches are going to be on our website very shortly. So if you're interested, please check that out. So this concludes the live stream portion of our event. Thank you to those watching online. Merci à tous ceux et celles qui nous ont écoutés en ligne. On vous souhaite une très belle soirée.
Thank you to everybody listening to us online. We wish you a good evening.